Ballot measure that hoped to put abortion access in Arkansas to a vote in November rejected.
Is it enough that they got the signatures and we can clean up any mistakes, or are we going to focus on the more technical aspects here?
After more than a month of legal wrangling, the latest push to expand abortion access in Arkansas is done for this year.
And since the rule is mandatory, failure to comply means they're not going to be on the ballot.
We cannot stop fighting until Arkansas women have access to health care, have bodily autonomy, and can make decisions about their own bodies without interference from the government.
It has been a busy, action-packed day here at the state capitol. That 5 p.m. deadline to turn in petitions just hit, and one of the petitions was even submitted with less than an hour to go. So this was an all-day thing. Some of these amendments, the boxes were carted in without a whole lot of fanfare here at the state capitol. But with others, that was not the case. The signatures for the medical marijuana amendment were delivered first, followed shortly by those for the casino amendment. The abortion petitions were delivered shortly after, around 2:30. And this time, the Capitol was packed waiting for their arrival. If it makes it onto the ballot, voters will have the chance to expand abortion access in Arkansas. Supporters and opponents of the amendment stood side by side, the opponents protesting silently, the supporters cheering as the signatures came in.
I have never met a more amazing group of people in Arkansas in my life. And today we're just going to cheer them on when they walk in those boxes.
The abortion petition also claims to have reached the requirements, but their number is much closer, just over 100,000 signatures in 53 counties. Now the Arkansas Secretary of State's office will start counting and verifying, and there's a lot to check.
Each signature is matched against the voter registration database. It's not just a number of signatures.
The deadline to find out which amendments made the ballot is August 22nd, but the Secretary of State's office is going to start working now. They've hired 90 temporary workers to assist their staff in making sure the petitions have the required number of legitimate signatures.
12 hours a day for the next month, solid, so we've got our work cut out for us.
Breaking news tonight, the ballot measure that hoped to put abortion access in Arkansas to a vote in November rejected.
The development comes less than a week after the group pushing the proposal turned in more than 100,000 signatures, but the Secretary of State says they failed to include some important paperwork.
THV11's Sarah Herbakowitz is live to explain that decision. Sarah?
Today, the count has stopped, all on a technicality. And it's not about the signatures themselves, but rather who got those signatures. Today, in a letter from the Secretary of State's office to those behind the abortion amendment, saying that they didn't have the right documentation clarifying paid canvassers versus volunteers. The state says even if canvassers volunteered on their own time, if they had a paid job with the organization behind the amendment, that extra documentation is required by law. And without signatures from paid canvassers, the amendment is a few thousand signatures shy of the required 90,000 to make the ballot. The Attorney General responding to the rejection today, saying in part, quote, "Changing the Arkansas Constitution involves a rigorous process, as it should, and it requires sponsors to adhere to all applicable laws and rules. In this instance, the sponsors failed to follow the law." But the group behind the amendment, Arkansas for Limited Government, isn't quitting yet, telling me they're working with their legal team, and the paperwork they used was supplied by the Secretary of State's office.
It's accountability that the state government itself has set up through these new processes on the ballot initiative process. And so the irony that the state would potentially be disenfranchising over 101,000 Arkansas voters because of something they consider, binding enough to disqualify us from the ballot is really upsetting.
Right now, everything is in the hands of lawyers, and it could be a little while before we know for sure what's next. But as it stands, abortion will not be on the November ballot, upholding the state's current near-abortion ban.
On Thursday, Arkansans for Limited Government, which is the group behind the amendment, released a letter saying they did submit the proper paperwork to the Secretary of State's office, even claiming they did so multiple times. On Saturday, protesters gathered to make this claim once again. Saturday afternoon, pro-choice protesters of all ages gathered in front of the state capitol to say that they believe the Secretary of State's office did not give their amendment a fair chance. They repeated the claim that they submitted everything they needed to, and claims otherwise are false.
To say that they were going to throw it out is inexcusable. It's not justifiable. In my mind, it's rather bogus.
Some of those in attendance also gave speeches about what the amendment means to them and why they believe the signatures collected for it should be counted. But the Secretary of State's office doesn't think so, and if they don't change their tune, pro-choice advocates may be running out of alternatives.
Legally, I don't know what we're going to do except for we'll do it up again 2 years from now to get it on the next ballot.
The group working to make abortion legal again in Arkansas filing a lawsuit this morning against the Secretary of State after his rejection of their proposed amendment last week.
Question is it a technicality that should matter, that does matter, and that will matter? And we don't have the answer to at least some of those questions, and we'll have to wait and see.
Secretary of State John Thurston says the group did not submit required documents that identify paid canvassers. The group continues to push back, filing a lawsuit against Thurston and his office on Tuesday.
It's not a valid argument to disqualify us because we didn't do something that others do on the regular, but that's not required by state law. There are unfortunately varying, instructions on what one has to do. We have a handbook that's provided to us by the Secretary of State's office. That handbook is not consistent with Arkansas code.
With both sides at standstill, voters are still wondering what's next. We took that question to Professor Robert Steinbuck with the Bowen School of Law.
The court can A, say, oh, well, when the abortion folks handed in that affidavit, say 2 weeks prior, that's good enough. The second possible solution is the court can say, well, you were supposed to hand it in simultaneously and you didn't, but I'm going to give you 30 days to hand it in now. And then the third possible solution is the court says, no, the Secretary of State is in fact correct.
Steinbuck says it all comes down to what government officials decide to focus on when looking at proposed ballot measures, like the abortion amendment.
There's no question that they got roughly 100,000 signatures. The question is whether they satisfied some technical requirements, and it's that balance, right? Is it enough that they got the signatures and we can clean up any mistakes later, or are we going to focus on the more technical aspects here?
Breaking tonight from the state Supreme Court, the 100,000 plus signatures gathered by supporters of an abortion amendment will be tallied up by the Secretary of State. That's the order by a majority of the justices in a lawsuit filed by those supporters. It calls on Secretary of State John Thurston to get an initial count of the signatures gathered by volunteer canvassers. 2 weeks ago, Thurston rejected the entire petition from the group, Arkansans for Limited Government, saying the submission lacked a key piece of paperwork regarding paid canvassers. This initial count will determine the next steps, and it has to be done by Monday morning next week. The High Court will then hold another hearing after that. Volunteers gathered more than 87,000 signatures with an additional 912 that the Secretary of State's office couldn't determine whether they came from volunteers or not. The group needed 90,704 signatures to qualify for the November ballot. The Arkansas Supreme Court, who ordered this initial count, are expected to hold a hearing next week on whether or not the paid canvasser signatures will eventually count.
Today, both the state and the sponsor of the amendment filed responses, which will go before the state's highest court. THV11's Ashley Godwin spoke to a legal expert on what happens next.
The court can act very quickly when it wants to.
With less than 100 days until the election, the Arkansas Supreme Court is looking at whether or not the organization that sponsored the Arkansas Abortion Amendment followed state law for certification. While the Secretary of State says no, the group Arkansans for Limited Government says they did, including adding a new document to their case they say shows the Secretary of State's office is not treating every petition equally. The document is an email the Secretary of State sent to the group sponsoring a medical marijuana amendment. The email says the group failed to comply with submitting a list of paid canvassers, but will apply this during the cure period. Arkansans for Limited Government says these issues are the exact same, but the Secretary of State has not disqualified the other petition, so they should get a cure period as well.
Well, I think it's a relevant factor, right? If, in fact, This group is not given an opportunity to cure, as I described earlier, and other groups are given opportunities to cure for comparable issues, then that's an issue.
After more than a month of legal wrangling, the latest push to expand abortion access in Arkansas is done for this year.
Earlier today, the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that the proposed amendment will not be allowed on the November ballot.
According to a law professor I spoke to today, it's that technicality involving a lack of paperwork for paid canvassers and how they were trained that led to justices to rule in favor of Secretary of State John Thurston.
While we couldn't have anticipated which technicality might create issues, we had to make a safe assumption that some technicality would cause some problem.
Justices decided that a proposed amendment to expand abortion rights will not be allowed on the ballot. It's a blow to Arkansans for Limited Government, the group behind the measure.
One of the disputed issues in the case is, did a member of Arkansans for Limited Government have to sign the certification, or could the canvassing firm act as an agent for Arkansans for Limited Government and have one of their officers sign? The court did not resolve that issue. The court said we don't need to resolve the issue. The proper certification wasn't submitted at all. We don't arrive at that who signs issue.
The group released a statement on Thursday following the ruling. Organizers say while they're upset with the results, they're thankful for their volunteers and leaders who work to educate voters. Arkansas Secretary of State John Thurston, who originally tossed out the measure on that technicality, also released a statement saying, in part, during the electoral process, my staff maintained the highest professional standards and did not allow partisan politics or misinformation to deter them from their duty to comply with the law.
And what the state Supreme Court ruled is that Arkansans for Limited Government failed to comply with one of those rules, and since the rule is mandatory, failure to comply means they're not going to be on the ballot.
But Silverstein says this isn't the end of the push to expand abortion access in Arkansas.
And we can be darn sure of two things. One, they will make sure to file the certification in the way the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled, and there will still be litigation because someone else will fight on some other technicality. That's just how this process works.
AFLG specifically feels very strongly that we cannot stop fighting until Arkansas women have access to health care and have bodily autonomy and can make decisions about their own bodies without interference from the government.